On June 22, 1941, Adolf Hitler stood at the pinnacle of power. He controlled Europe from the Atlantic to the Russian border, and the Nazi war machine seemed unstoppable. So, how did a regime that conquered a continent in weeks lose the entire world in 4 years? The answer is not one single defeat, but a chain reaction of hubris, delusion, and monumental strategic failures. Today, we break down the 6 fatal decisions that sealed the fate of the Third Reich. The first and most fatal mistake was an act of ideological blindness, the Two-Front War. For decades, German military doctrine had feared and avoided a war on 2 fronts simultaneously. Yet Hitler walked straight into the trap, failing to finish Britain. After the fall of France in 1940, Hitler had the chance to crush Britain and secure his western flank. But his air force, the Luftwaffe, failed to achieve air superiority during the Battle of Britain. When Hitler foolishly shifted bombing targets from military airfields to civilian cities, he allowed the Royal Air Force to survive, forcing Britain to remain in the war. This decision kept the Western Front alive, eternally pinning down crucial German resources. The Barbarossa blunder. Then, driven by ideology and a desperate need for resources, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. He fatally underestimated the Red Army's resilience, the depth of Soviet industry, and the brutal Russian winter. The vast, endless distances swallowed German supply lines, and by the time the devastating winter hit, the German troops were unprepared. By opening the Eastern Front, Hitler committed 80% of his fighting power to an endless, frozen grinder, signing his empire's death warrant. As the war turned against him, Hitler transformed from a charismatic leader into a delusional micromanager. The early victories were won by his generals. The later defeats were dictated by his ego. The Stalingrad suicide. The most egregious example of his micromanagement was the Battle of Stalingrad. Instead of allowing his generals to manage the fighting and conduct a tactical retreat when necessary, Hitler became politically obsessed with capturing the city named after his adversary. He issued the catastrophic order, "Surrender is forbidden." This political commitment led directly to the encirclement and eventual annihilation of the entire German Sixth Army. 250,000 men lost. Stalingrad was the irreversible turning point on the Eastern Front. Ignoring the logistics, his strategic focus was often based on ideology or personal vendettas, rather than sound military logic. His desperate need for oil, to fuel the war machine and sustain his campaigns, fueled the drive south toward the Caucasus oil fields, diverting forces desperately needed to capture Moscow. He chased resources he couldn't effectively seize or hold, forgetting the cardinal rule of war. Logistics determines strategy. He wasted precious resources, time, and manpower attempting to fix problems his own ideological overreach created. The Axis powers, for all their tactical brilliance, fundamentally lost the war because they lost the battle of industrial capacity. Once the United States fully entered the conflict, the numbers became impossible to overcome. The power of the American factory. The United States produced more of everything, faster and better, than the entire Axis combined. This was the true arsenal of democracy. For every tank Germany built in 1944, the Allies built 3. The sheer volume of Allied production drowned the Wehrmacht. The Germans' entire strategy of blitzkrieg relied on quick, overwhelming victory. They were never designed to win a protracted war of attrition against industrialized global powers. The resource drain. While Germany had conquered vast territories, the materials and manpower were stretched too thin. Hitler's relentless bombing of British cities had galvanized the American response, and the subsequent Allied strategic bombing campaign systematically targeted German infrastructure and oil refineries. This constant assault choked off the flow of raw materials and crippled the ability to deliver finished goods to the front lines. Hitler was defeated by the sheer volume of his opponent's steel, oil, and manpower. Germany certainly possessed incredible technological genius. The V-2 rocket was the first object to cross the boundary of space, and the Me-262 Schwalbe was the world's first operational jet fighter. These weapons could have been game changers, but they became another strategic failure. The wonder weapon obsession. Instead of prioritizing the mass production of existing, proven weapons that could win battles, Hitler became obsessed with these complex, revolutionary, and often impractical wonder weapons. The Me-262 was delayed because Hitler insisted it be converted into a faster bomber, undermining its superior performance as a fighter. This misallocation consumed massive amounts of rare materials and high-skilled labor. Too little, too late. When the Me-262 finally arrived in significant numbers, the Allies already controlled the skies. These advanced weapons never provided the decisive edge Hitler promised. Furthermore, the immense resources dedicated to the V2 program would have been far better spent on developing defensive anti-aircraft networks or increasing the output of conventional tanks and artillery. German innovation was wasted on futuristic toys instead of securing the present battlefield. In the final, chilling analysis, Hitler's extreme, hateful ideology directly undermined his own war effort, proving that for the Nazis, ideology was more important than victory. The Holocaust and the rail lines. The single greatest example of this self-sabotage was the Holocaust. At a time when every single train, every drop of fuel, and every soldier was desperately needed on the Eastern Front, Hitler prioritized the transportation of millions of victims to the extermination camps. This commitment diverted essential rail stock and vast amounts of military manpower that could have saved countless lives on the front lines. Purging the competent. Hitler's racist and ideological purges within the military and scientific community also cost Germany dearly. Generals who dared to question his commands, regardless of their competence, were fired. Scientists and engineers of Jewish background who could have spearheaded crucial wartime projects were forced to flee Europe, often ending up working for the Allies. Hitler intentionally deprived his own war machine of its best minds and most capable leadership. By late 1944, the game was over. Hitler wasn't fighting one war. He was fighting a losing battle on three separate, converging fronts. The ring closes. On the east, the unstoppable Red Army was advancing with a singular focus on Berlin. In the west, the successful D-Day invasion created a second major front, forcing Germany to split its dwindling resources between fighting the Soviets and the rapidly advancing Western Allies. Simultaneously, the Allied advance up the Italian peninsula consumed massive German manpower in the south. The refusal to yield. Hitler refused to yield ground, sacrificing entire divisions to hold inconsequential cities. His refusal to consolidate defenses and his reliance on promises of miracle weapons doomed his remaining armies to total attrition. In the final desperate months, Hitler committed suicide not because he ran out of soldiers, but because he ran out of time, resources, and space. He didn't lose the war because his enemies were better. He lost because his own hubris, hate, and flawed judgment ensured that his enemies' advantages became insurmountable. The tragedy of Hitler's defeat is the profound lesson it offers. The most dangerous enemy of a powerful regime is often the toxic ideology and the blind ego of its own leader. If you want to continue uncovering the historical forces that decide the fate of nations, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history.